and you are looking live at a Falcon 9 rocket on the launch pad at the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida. At 12:51 this afternoon, the aerospace company SpaceX will launch a Dragon cargo spacecraft on a NASA mission to resupply the International Space Station. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to NASA's Kennedy Space Center for our live coverage of the launch of the 19th resupply mission for SpaceX. I'm your host, Jennifer Wolfinger. We are about 28 minutes away from the planned liftoff of a Falcon 9 rocket from the coast of Florida. The mission? To fly much-needed astronaut supplies and research experiments up to the International Space Station. And we have a team of correspondents across the country helping us cover all the angles of this launch. We will head to the Mission Director Center here on the Space Coast to get updates on the weather and the countdown. And we'll head west to SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, and check in at Mission Control Houston at Johnson Space Center. But first, here are some quick facts about today's launch. SpaceX transported the Falcon 9 rocket out to the launch pad and lifted it to the vertical launch position for the 19th cargo resupply mission to the International Space Station. This is the third flight for this Dragon spacecraft and the first time this Falcon booster has been flown. Dragon will deliver more than 5,700 pounds of astronaut supplies and payloads for science research to the orbiting laboratory. The launch window today is instantaneous, which means SpaceX must launch at the exact second for the planned liftoff or try again another day. The plan is to keep the Dragon spacecraft docked to station for about a month before bringing it back to Earth. The Dragon spacecraft will be filled with critical materials to directly support science and research that will take place on the International Space Station. Dragon will carry the Confined Combustion Investigation, which examines the behavior of flame as it spreads in differently shaped confined spaces in microgravity. Understanding how fire spreads and behaves in space is crucial for the safety of astronauts and for understanding and controlling fire here on Earth. Another exciting payload is the Hyperspectral Imager Suite, which is a next-generation hyperspectral Earth imaging system developed by the Japanese government. It provides space-based observations for tasks such as resource exploration and applications in agriculture, forestry, and other environmental areas. The Mighty Mice in Space, or Rodent Research 19 investigation, will research features that influence muscle degradation to prevent skeletal muscle and bone loss during spaceflight and enhance recovery following return to Earth. This study could also support the development of therapies for a wide range of conditions that cause muscle and bone loss. Later in the show, we'll be joined by a Station National Lab expert who will share more details about the exciting research taking place on station. Now let's bring in NASA's Joshua Santora, who is in the Mission Director Center just a few miles away from the launch pad. Hey, Joshua.
Hey, Jennifer. It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas here on the Space Coast, and for us that means partly cloudy skies and cool mornings and days. So the weather outside is looking great. That is a big point of concern yesterday. At what would have been T-0 at liftoff time, we did have winds that would have violated the launch constraints. So we're back here today. The weather's looking great. We have we've just got a recent update that the percent of violation is actually now down to 10%. So the weather even improving for today. We've got nice skies out there. There are some clouds that are coming through the general area, but ultimately we're hearing that those are not going to arrive until after our launch today. So weather looks great. That coming care of our launch weather officer, Mike McAleenan from the U.S. Air Force 45th Space Wing Weather Squadron. So we're keeping an eye on the technical side as well, and it has been a really quiet morning for the countdown, which is good news. That means there are not a lot of issues, hardly any to speak of, in fact. So keeping an eye on things, progressing well. Again, our instantaneous window is actually set for 12, 29, and 24 seconds. So that's the instant that we're looking to launch today. And this rocket actually is carrying the star of the show, the Cargo Dragon, with those resources and research and supplies. This Cargo Dragon was originally flown back in September of 2014 on the Commercial Resupply Services 4 mission. You can see here a beautiful night launch lighting up the sky and delivering research and cargo back in 2014, and then actually the first Cargo Dragon to be reused in June of 2017. It flew again on the CRS-11 mission. That's actually from Launch Complex 39A at the Kennedy Space Center. So a very exciting accomplishment for them, and another exciting accomplishment today with this Cargo Dragon flying for its third time. This is the first time we've had a CRS Cargo Dragon that is a third flown, which is amazing. I'm so excited to have that. Another groundbreaking achievement for the CRS program and for just the life of the space station. So, Jennifer, we are underway with fueling. things progressing well. Again, targeting that instantaneous window. So for us here now, we're going to send it back over to you, and we'll touch back in a few minutes.
Thanks, Joshua, and we'll check back with you a little later. Right now, we are at T-minus 24 minutes and counting. Let's check in with SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, where the Falcon 9 rocket and Crew Dragon were designed and built. Andy Tran is joining us live from SpaceX's Mission Control Center. Andy, will you tell us a little bit about Dragon's history?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer. This mission marks SpaceX's 12th launch of 2019, and today we're going to be launching a flight-proven Dragon spacecraft. As Joshua mentioned, this vehicle visited the International Space Station twice before, both on CRS-11 in June of 2017 and CRS-4 back in September of 2014. And while this Dragon has flown before, the booster we'll be flying today is actually brand new. After stage separation, we'll be landing the first stage on our drone ship out in the Atlantic Ocean so that it can be reflown on future missions. Now, both Falcon 9 and Dragon were designed with reflight in mind, so the vehicle hardware is built to support multiple missions with minimal refurbishment in between. Our Dragon spacecraft has been flying for nearly 9 years now, and today it's one of the few vehicles flying that can deliver significant cargo to the International Space Station, and the only one that can deliver significant cargo from it. To provide a little historical background, in 2010, SpaceX became the first private company to send a spacecraft into orbit and then return it to Earth. Just 2 years later, Dragon became the first privately developed spacecraft to visit the space station. Since then, SpaceX has made a total of 19 trips to the International Space Station, and we're under contract with NASA for a total of 26 of these cargo resupply missions. Today's mission is to support the 20th trip to the International Space Station, and we're looking forward to a successful launch day. With that, back to you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Andy. We are commemorating the 20th year of the International Space Station. October 31st, 2020 marks 2 decades of continuous human presence in space, and November 2nd, 2020 marks 20 years of continuous human presence in low Earth orbit. The space station, one of the most ambitious international collaborations ever attempted, is a convergence of science, technology, and human innovation. It is one of the most crucial stepping stones for NASA's plan to land humans on the moon in 2024 through the Artemis program. Liftoff of today's rocket from Launch Complex 40 is timed right down to the very second. The reason for this? SpaceX needs to get their cargo spacecraft lined up to rendezvous with the International Space Station. For more on this, let's check in with NASA's Dan Hewitt, who is live at Johnson Space Center in Houston. Dan?
Hey, thanks, Jennifer, and welcome everybody inside of Mission Control Houston here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. As you may be able to see right over my shoulder, the holidays have arrived here in the control room, where right now the Orbit 2 team is on console supporting the crew on board. They are led today in the room right now by Flight Director Allison Bollinger, who just about 2 hours ago pulled the teams and was able to report to the SpaceX mission director that the International Space Station is go for today's launch. Dragon ultimately bound for the International Space Station, where right now the 6-person crew of Expedition 61 is going through a day preparing for this eventual arrival. They are led by Luca Parmitano. He's the tall gentleman right there in the middle. He's an ESA astronaut from Italy. Going from left to right real quick, NASA astronaut Drew Morgan, Russian cosmonaut Alexander Skvortsov, Parmitano, and then just next to him, Oleg Skoropochka, another Roscosmos cosmonaut. And then rounding out the crew on the right there are NASA astronauts Jessica Meir and Christina Cook. Once Dragon arrives with a launch today, it's going to arrive on Sunday, and that will be up to Luca Parmitano and Drew Morgan to actually use the station's 57-foot-long robotic arm, the Canadarm2, to reach out and grapple Dragon once it arrives. It'll camp out about 30 feet or so away from the International Space Station, and they'll use that arm to reach out and grab it right out of space. Then they'll turn over control down to the teams here on the ground to actually install Dragon, and we'll obviously be bringing you coverage of all that once it arrives. That'll be happening on Sunday with a launch today, capture timed right around 5 a.m. Central Time, 6 a.m. Eastern. As you saw, there's about 5,700 pounds of cargo coming up, and Jennifer walked through some of the highlights of the research. There's over 1 ton of science investigations on board, and with these SpaceX missions, they usually kick off a really fast and furious couple of weeks for the crew once the Dragon arrives, as there's a lot of what we call sortie science, so science coming up that has to come back down with Dragon in just 30 days once it returns. So the crew will be very busy. They've just wrapped up a bunch of spacewalks, now about to get into some really hardcore science over the next couple of weeks during this Dragon mission. But with that, we are excited, ready to see Dragon launch. Everything's go on the International Space Station side, so I'm going to send it back down to Florida. Back over to you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Dan. CRS-19 is packed with a variety of investigations sponsored by the U.S. National Laboratory. Here's a closer look at that research. Joining me now is Patrick O'Neill, an expert on the U.S. National Lab. Thanks for being here, Patrick.
Thank you for having me.
We saw some really cool science in that video. Can you tell us a little bit more about the investigations happening on the lab?
Yeah, I think that video was a great encapsulation of some of the payloads that are going on this mission. We have everything from rodents, model organisms that are flying. Budweiser is sending more barley to the space station. This will be their 4th separate investigation to the space station. And then on top of that, we're also looking at fire in confined spaces. So I think that the video kind of touched on some of those elements. But there's also cube satellites that are flying on this mission. We also have an investigation that is sponsored by the National Stem Cell Foundation that is looking at brain organoids, that is focused on Parkinson's disease as well as multiple sclerosis. So we really have an awful lot of diversity that is on this mission, and it really kind of encapsulates what's possible on the space station. Whether you're looking at life, physical, material sciences, technology development, it's all represented right here on this mission.
All that sounds really amazing, which may make it hard for you to answer this question. What do you consider to be some of the highlights of the year?
Well, I think that this year in general has just been a banner year for the space station in its entirety, whether that be from a national lab perspective or from NASA. Speaking on behalf of the National Laboratory, this has truly been the banner year of research to date. We've sent more payloads to the space station than we ever have before. We've had astronauts working on station more than they ever creates this orbiting laboratory.
Right. We accomplished so much this year. What do you see for 2020?
Well, I would like to say that you're going to see more of the same, but just that you're going to see more of it. You know, I think that the idea is that we're going to be sending more payloads that have recognizable companies and brands that are interested in using the space station to enhance products, therapies, to improve life on Earth. And then we're also going to be seeing a variety of partners like the NIH and the NSFs of the world who are looking to fund investigations that can bring fundamental and applied knowledge from space-based activity and bringing it back home here on Earth.
I can't think of a better way to start a new decade. Thank you again for being here with us.
Thank you so much, and go Dragon.
So let's take a closer look at today's Falcon 9 and Dragon spacecraft. Today we will be delivering more than 5,700 pounds of cargo to the ISS, including critical materials to support numerous science and research investigations that will occur on board the orbiting laboratory. We'll have more detail on that research later in today's webcast. This will be SpaceX's 12th launch this year, and we'll be launching a flight-proven Dragon spacecraft today for its third mission. It previously flew on CRS-4 in September 2014 and CRS-11 in June 2017. Both Falcon 9 and Dragon were designed with reflight in mind, so the vehicle hardware is built to support multiple missions with minimal refurbishment in between. Today we will be flying a brand new booster and recovering it on our autonomous drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, for use on future missions. And above the first stage is the second stage, which has a single Merlin vacuum or MVAC engine, which ignites after the first stage separates. The second stage is what will carry Dragon to its intended orbit, allowing the spacecraft to eventually rendezvous with the space station.
Hey there, I'm John Federspiel, Dragon Engineering Manager here at SpaceX, and I am thrilled to be here joining you for today's launch. If you just joined us yesterday, we stood down because of expected high winds during both ascent and at the recovery ship. Today, however, the weather is much improved with about 10-mile-per-hour ground winds, and we're looking great for an on-time launch. We're sitting about T-minus 12 minutes right now, and the SpaceX team is working no significant issues at the moment. Taking a step back, we conducted the go, no-go poll at T-minus 38 minutes, and propellant loading began shortly thereafter. Right now, our fuel, rocket-grade kerosene called RP1, is fully loaded on second stage, and we're topping off the first stage. Liquid oxygen loading is underway on both stages. We're about 75% full on first stage. We're going to continue loading liquid oxygen up right until the final 2 minutes of the countdown. We're also loading helium gas into both stages. Falcon 9 uses helium as a pressurant to backfill the stages as the tanks are emptied during ascent. Today we're flying Dragon. That's what you see in the screen right here. Dragon also reporting all systems go for today's flight. It's currently undergoing final vehicle health checks, with its next big event coming up at T-minus 8 minutes when the spacecraft will transition to internal battery power. Our last two wet indicators for the day, range ready to support. As I mentioned before, weather green for today's mission. And so with launch, Falcon 9, Dragon, and range all go for the flight at T-minus 10 minutes and 55 seconds. All systems are go at Cape Canaveral.
Our Dragon spacecraft has been making trips to the space station for 9 years now, and today it's still the only vehicle flying that can deliver significant cargo both to and from the orbiting lab. In 2010, SpaceX became the first private company to send a spacecraft to orbit and return it to Earth. Just 2 years later, in 2012, Dragon became the first privately developed spacecraft to visit the space station. Since then, SpaceX has made a total of 20 trips to station, and we're under contract with NASA for a total of 26 cargo resupply missions. This morning, Dragon will be carrying dozens of research payloads to the space station, including within the trunk the Hyperspectral Imager Suite, or HISUI, and a replacement battery for the space station's use. Once on station, HISUI will be removed from the trunk and deployed on the Japan Experiment Module for 3 years, where it will regularly image the Earth to observe environmental changes for scientific purposes. Let's take a look at some of the groundbreaking research that will be aboard the CRS-19 mission.
SpaceX's 19th commercial resupply services mission to the International Space Station is loaded with a variety of investigations sponsored by the U.S. National Lab. This mission includes investigations from life, physical, and material sciences, all with the intention of benefiting life on Earth. Let's get an idea about some of the investigations that are launching on SpaceX CRS-19. Over the past 3 years, Budweiser has sent a series of investigations to the ISS National Lab to evaluate the germination and gene expression of barley in space. This will mark Budweiser's 4th payload launching the station and builds on the company's previous experiments. This latest investigation will examine the barley malting process in microgravity, and results could have implications in food production both on Earth and in space. Rodent research investigations in microgravity have provided a critical tool for evaluating accelerated muscle wasting and bone loss. Insight from these space-based inquiries has led to breakthroughs in drug development for patients on Earth, as well as new ways to enhance astronaut health in space. Now, the Jackson Laboratory will be sending 40 mighty mice to the space station. These genetically enhanced mice lack myostatin, a growth factor that normally acts to limit muscle growth, resulting in mice that display increased muscle mass. The research team will evaluate the mighty mice in microgravity to examine the potential benefits of targeting the myostatin and activin signaling pathways to prevent skeletal muscle and bone loss. The National Science Foundation is funding an experiment from To learn more about all ISS National Lab sponsored investigations on this mission, visit issnationallab.org.
Times in the history of the Dragon program, with exciting events happening for both Dragon 1 and 2. The action really started last month, where we successfully static fired all 8 Super Draco engines on our in-flight abort test vehicle, meeting all test requirements. At full throttle, these engines together can generate over 120,000 pounds of thrust to safely propel Dragon away from Falcon 9, and the event abort is required. Successful completion of that test was a key milestone for both the SpaceX and NASA teams, as it demonstrated the upgrades to the Super Draco system in response to the test anomaly we experienced earlier this year. The team is now performing minor refurbishment to that capsule to prepare for the actual in-flight abort test targeted for February of 2020. Following a successful test, we'll move forward with launching humans, slated also for the first quarter of next year. Now, bringing it back to today's launch, we're sitting about T-minus 6 minutes and counting for an on-time launch to the International Space Station at 12:29 p.m. Eastern Time. In these final few moments, Falcon 9 is performing the last health checks on its primary communications, avionics, and propulsion systems in preparation for flight. The good news is, as we're looking through these checks, all systems remain go for today's flight. About a minute and a half ago, we began chilling in the engines of both the first and second stage vehicles. That's where we flow a small amount of liquid oxygen to the 9 Merlin 1D engines in the first stage to begin cooling them down to prepare them for full flow at ignition. This is why you start to see a white cloud form at the base, and now you see one closer in the inner stage as that liquid oxygen is boiling off into gaseous oxygen. As of right now, we're sitting completely full of fuel on the first and second stage and continuing to top off liquid oxygen on both stages. This is going to lead us up to these final few fueling moments, up to T-minus 1 minute, where Falcon 9 is going to take over the countdown process and enter into the startup mode, which will guide the rocket through the rest of the countdown. Listen in at T-minus 45 seconds, where you're going to hear the SpaceX launch director give us the final go for launch. And finally, a few seconds before ignition, before liftoff, the engines will ignite, leading to T-minus 0, where we will have the rocket be released from the hold-down clamps, and you will see the strong back retract away from the rocket, clearing the way for F9's ascent. We're taking Dragon today. It's also performing its final health checkouts. Its earlier transition to internal power went smoothly, and so it is all ready to go for today's flight to the space station. Range remains go for today's launch. No tracking, no issues. Weather also looking beautiful at Cape Canaveral. And so with about T-minus 4 minutes right now, we're actually going to go silent on our side at the webcast here and let you enjoy these final few moments before liftoff of Falcon 9 from Cape Canaveral.
Stage 1 launch load closed out. Stage 2 launch is closed out. Gas closeouts are starting. Falcon 9 in startup.
Dragon is in startup. Go for launch.
T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition, liftoff.
Vehicle is pitching downrange.
Stage 1 propulsion nominal.
T plus 40 seconds into today's flight. All systems looking nominal for today's mission. Dragon on its way to the International Space Station for its 19th Commercial Resupply Services mission. Coming up in about 20 seconds, we have max Q, our maximum aerodynamic pressure,
Vehicle
one of the highest
supersonic.
stress states on the vehicle. Just heard the call out that we passed through supersonic.
Vehicle has reached maximum aerodynamic pressure.
With that, we just heard the call. We passed through max Q.
Recovery AOS.
All 9 engines look good. Trajectory
Check
looks
engine
good.
kill.
Coming up, we are going to have the engine on our start of the boost stages as we wait for stage separation. And we just had a ignition of the set, and then on the left first stage, where the boost engine is shut down here, we are at T